ChatGPT could potentially eliminate jobs in some sectors, right? So what are your thoughts?
Yes, easily. I largely, um, I largely haven't really been hiring for a lot of jobs anymore. I used to, just as an example, I used to hire out little pieces of code or little configurations. So I
That
used
is
ChatGPT
Matt
as an example,
Peters.
and
Matt uses
I have seen
ChatGPT for his
great
programming
capabilities
in a
from it.
way that I have never heard of.
Things from
I enjoyed this episode and I hope you too will.
Welcome, everyone. I'm excited for this episode where I am going to have a conversation with Matt Peters, who's joining us today. We are going to talk about an exciting topic, a topic that's been talked a lot in forums and even in casual conversations nowadays, which is ChatGPT. So I'm going to have ask Matt to introduce himself first for the benefit of us to get him know a little bit more. And then from there on, we will talk about ChatGPT. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Yep, so Matt Peters, I've been working in IT security for 20 years or so, long time. And a few years ago, started doing, I have a passion for doing IT security conferences. So started Articon in Alaska and now ExploitCon, which is a sort of traveling conference where you're in a few cities around the US. And just a great way to meet people and to kind of better the IT security community.
Wonderful. That's great. So let's talk about ChatGPT, right? How are you using ChatGPT today since it's been released?
Geez, it's about most of my day I spend in it now, strangely enough. So,
So you
um,
are the one that's breaking their servers. Now I found out.
I am the reason why there's a 25 messages for every 3 hours limit on there right now. So, I feel like I use ChatGPT in kind of an advanced way. I use it heavily for programming and, um, uh, recently, as far as how I'm using it today, building an application which uses the API of ChatGPT to basically dynamically develop a program. So I can give it, for example, I need a CRM application, and it will build a list of steps using ChatGPT. So it'll say what is needed for a CRM application, build that list of steps, and then automatically execute that list of steps and build the Docker environment and things like that. So I'm probably the only one that's bashing my head over like all the programming issues with it, whereas everybody else is making their lives easier. So I think it's made mine harder, strangely enough. But I'm a little bit more on the sort of trying to do a little bit of research with it, and uh,
Got it. So let's dive a little bit deeper from there. So can you walk me through a scenario? So let's say you're building did you say you're building a CRM system or updating a
so.
CRM?
As an example, a CRM system. So for a more concrete example of what I'm building with it, um, try to give a good example here. So whenever we build, let's say, a Django application, you have to build all these mini applications inside of the application. So, and the most annoying thing is you have to light it up, and then you have to. There's about 20 steps there. Okay, make migrations, migrate, and all these annoyances, right? Build out the models. These are things that are all kind of known on the internet. As for example, as a contact needs a first name, last name, a phone number, things like that. The system doesn't need me to tell it that. I can just say, hey, build me out a model for a contact. And so that's essentially what it does. The one specific thing I'm working with today. Um, so I put in at the beginning, hey, I would like a CRM system that does this, connects to my email accounts, connects to my knowledge base, uh, things like that. And I can put in all of my requirements. Sends it off to ChatGPT. ChatGPT says, okay, here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to build a system that has Elasticsearch, Postgres database, these five things. Then you're going to need an Nginx server. And so it builds out those steps. And then it gives the steps for each mini application that it needs, comments, um, contacts, those sorts of things. So builds out that list, and then it basically iterates through that list and builds all those applications. The problem I'm solving with it that isn't solved already is my application basically executes the code, and if there's an error, sends back that error to ChatGPT. It corrects the error, sends back the output. That's the thing that doesn't really that I haven't seen that exists today. That I'm kind of making that new. That's why, like I said, I'm the only one that's probably doing it. You probably don't run into that many people that are having this many problems with the API, but it's something I have to go back and forth with.
Okay, so how do you use ChatGPT in the sense, do you go to a web browser and type up your question, or do you have some sort of a plugin that works with your programming tool?
In my advanced example, I'm using Python to communicate with it, so it's using the APIs. So now to get so there's most of the time I spend in the web application though, because I'll say I need a function that does this. So as an example, I need a function that connects to the OpenAI GPI or OpenAI API and makes a request. And let's say, I don't know, filters the output, something like that. So I'll ask GPT-4 for that. GPT-4 isn't accessible via the API as a kind of aside. It is, just not for me. There's a wait list. So I use GPT-4 to maybe make those functions to help me with programming, which it does quite a bit. So it builds out the function for me. It builds out maybe the script piece that I need. I take that, I run it, and if there's an error, which there often is, I put that back into GPT, and it says, "Hey, here's the error. Here's the correction for that error." I think what a lot of people don't maybe realize is how much that process is. If you're programming with GPT, you ask it for a piece of code, and if you were to look at that piece of code, you'd probably say, yeah, it looks about right. But when you go to run it, there's something wrong with it. And so the magic of it actually comes from iterating, from taking that piece of code, putting it back in again and saying, are you sure are you sure about this code? And then it'll actually often correct it. Or if you run it and you get that error and you put it in, it'll say, I see you're using a different version of this. Here's the corrected output. So that's where the magic kind of comes in.
Interesting. So how do you do that iteration? Do you do it manually now, asking ChatGPT again and again, or do you have a automation, so to speak?
Yeah, that's actually the thing that I'm building now. So as an example, I have it building a Docker Compose right now. So it's one of the stages is it builds up a Docker Compose and it builds up the infrastructure. Well, it messes up on that quite a bit. Basically, I go to run it and there's an error. So what I have it do is generate it, and then automatically my program runs that Docker Compose file, gets the error, sends it back. What I actually found was kind of funny was I can save a bit of time by just having it generate 10, run all of them, and just see which one works. And yeah,
How do you
it
ask
actually had much better results, strangely enough.
interesting. So how do you ask a ChatGPT to generate 10 variations for you? Is there
Actually, I
one
just asked it
command?
10 times. I asked it 10 times with different. There's a few settings that are accessible on the API that you typically don't see if you're on the interface, which is temperature, and so one of them is temperature. So you can say temperature 0.3. So that means it's going to send you back a fairly consistent response. So a fairly uncreative response, I guess is how I'd phrase it. But if I knock that up, it's going to get more creative with its response. Now in coding, that's less useful, right? So you'd use typically a lower temperature. But in reality, whenever I change that number, it can give me better results. I'm actually saving the outputs or saving the results to Elasticsearch so I can kind of figure out what are the better what are the better temperature settings for for coding. But all of this happens without my intervention, which is really nice. Uh, the act of having been a person that does Docker Compose stuff, things like that, uh, being a person that does Docker Compose badly, I would say, as a necessity, I could easily waste a day just launching it, tearing it down, cleaning up the images, and cleaning up the containers. That this does it for me automatically has been a huge time saver.
I see. Fascinating. Okay. So the temperature control that you just mentioned, right? So when I understand that you're using an API to interact with ChatGPT. When I use ChatGPT on a browser, is there a way for me to adjust the temperature
I
as
don't
I'm
think so.
requesting a response?
Yeah, I'm,
Okay.
I'm not sure about that, but on the normal ChatGPT interface, it doesn't look like it. There is if you use the API, so as an API consumer, there is a test interface where you can go there and you can set exactly which model you want to use, the token lengths and things like that. As far as from my experience, I think just using words, you can get it to be more creative or less creative. So I don't think, but I imagine that the browser is using an API call that has a temperature setting of 5.
Yeah, I noticed there is some business that are starting up now selling prompts, ChatGPT prompts, because it
Yes.
matters how you ask the question,
Oh my gosh, it does.
the
Yes, I
quality of
use
the
this.
response. Really.
I use a service called Prompt Perfect,
Oh,
and I should probably say, just in case somebody goes to make the purchase, there's a way around this. But um, so I use a service where I just put in what I need, and it generates a prompt for me. The advantage that service gives me is that it generates prompts for Midjourney, for ChatGPT 3, ChatGPT 4, and it does some things that get around some of the I believe it's called ethical filters. It's very annoying in security development, especially when I say, "Hey, build me a vulnerable Docker Docker container so I can test security things on it," and it says, "No, we don't do that here at OpenAI."
I see.
And so you have to do a little bit of work to get it to actually output that. As far as the prompts that people buy, though, I'm actually not 100% on that. I've gone through those, and I don't think they're that far off from what you would just get by, putting it, coming up with it yourself.
Got it. Okay, great. So you talked about an application where you are creating a system by taking input from ChatGPT. It sounds like to me, based on how you described, it sounds like the steps that you take in interacting with ChatGPT is iterative, right? So you first ask that high level question, ask for a framework, then you dig one step further, then dig two steps
Yes.
further. You keep going like that. So is there any way to automate this whole thing so you don't have to just push a button and it gives you the end result?
Yes, I'm actually pretty close on it right now. It looks like it's doing well on my Docker Compose setups, and um, it looks like it's doing okay on my code generation. I think whenever ChatGPT 4 API comes out, where I'm able to use that, I think it'll be just about perfect. The it is so as an example, for me to build let's take any sort of normal Django project, or any sort of normal um, web project. Let's say you need something for, um, let's say, managing students. I don't know. So I'm going to manage the students and their grades and their schedules and things like that. So you come up with this system, and it's kind of basic, but let's say there's 20 models to it: a student, a class, and so on and so on. That whole system, you could have a prototype up in a couple of weeks, maybe, so, somewhere around there. With this system I'm working with, the prototype is probably done in about 3 to 4 hours, somewhere in that range. And I didn't need to give it I think the great thing that I'm finding with it that I didn't expect, um, most of my time I spend on thinking about data structures, like, okay, how does this connect to this and stuff like that. Well, it doesn't take a genius to say, yeah, a student has a first name, a last name, an email address, a phone number. And so that's why I can just put in build a model for a student, build a model for a class, and whatever it's missing, I can go in there and fix it later if I need to.
I see. Okay, interesting. Great. So are you planning to sell that product once it's available? Maybe you can.
So I can't imagine I'm the only one doing this. So I I would have to imagine that, uh, it seems very useful to me at this point, and I would have to imagine that there's some startup going to come out and, the next week or so that has a similar thing. I would love to sell it. I just I can't imagine it's something that is not already very heavily in the works from like a Google or something like that, because it's such an obvious thing, that yes, ChatGPT produces code, but if we were to treat it like a human and have it iterate that code, then because that's all I'm really doing is I'm saying, okay, you created the code, now let's test it out. Because most of the code that ChatGPT creates, if it's very simple, it works. If it's complex, it typically doesn't. And we're just saying, okay, iterate that. And 5, 10 iterations later, you actually have a really good set of code because I also ask it to improve the code as it goes along.
Okay, wonderful. I'm assuming you are using a paid version of ChatGPT to use it this extensively.
Yes, yes, but API calls are extremely cheap. Something like, let's say, 2 cents for 100, 2 cents for 10 calls, I think. Yeah.
Okay, it's not bad.
Yep.
Great. And ChatGPT claims that the data is not any good past, I think, November of 2021, something like that. So it's
Yeah,
anything.
it's very annoying. That's
Yeah, but
extremely
is
annoying.
that causing you any problem in
Oh
your
my gosh.
development?
Yes. Every
Okay.
all the time. Yes, I actually had to build a I'm sure this plugin exists, but I built a plugin so that it would search the web because it was just so annoying. So for instance, a package I use often is Selenium. And there's a slight difference in how the newest package uh, calls functions and how the old one did. Now I could use the old one, but that's gonna, in my experience, that typically gives me more issues. So instead, I can just have it search and look at the updates or updated documentation.
I see. Okay. Interesting. So you're customizing it that way.
Yes, you kind of have to. Honestly, that from a coding perspective, that's the largest annoyance there is. I mean, it like I use Elasticsearch a lot, and it will try to set up Elasticsearch in this way that we haven't used, on a long time by, you know, IT standards. So I can either stick with that old architecture or shift to the new one and train it how to correct those things.
Got it. Okay. And during our email exchange, you mentioned that you were using ChatGPT to write an email. So is that a manual step, or do you have some sort of integration with your email application to leverage ChatGPT?
I do have an integration with the email application. I don't really like it though. So for most users, you're going to be using um, yes, I have it's called Blue Mail and it's built in, so you pay extra and it uses that
Oh,
setup. I don't know if it's using ChatGPT. I don't think it would be because the responses come out extremely formal, and so they're not all that usable for me. So I have to edit them quite a bit. Now, if I use normal ChatGPT, then I'm able to generate a good response out of that. So it is something for an application I'm building for managing my events. I did build that connection into it so that it sets the correct prompt and or sets the correct precursor for the prompt so that I get out an email that's usable. And so basically it's kind of my own email client. And then, in that way it's usable. But it is what I think a lot of people don't see and why you don't see this already in a lot of applications is it's not instant, the response that you get back. So it might be 10 seconds, let's say, for you to get that response back, which for users is a little too much
yeah.
most of the time.
Okay. So for usage like emails, are we better off going to the web browser and interact with ChatGPT that way?
I would say yes. Otherwise, you're going to sound super formal. But
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like ChatGPT is helping you to be productive in your technological work, right? But on the other side, I'm hearing some concerns from folks in general regarding ChatGPT could potentially eliminate jobs in some sectors, right? So what are your thoughts? Could ChatGPT eliminate jobs?
yes, easily. Um, I largely haven't really been hiring for a lot of jobs anymore. I used to, just as an example, I used to hire out little pieces of code or little configurations. So the example I use often is I have a system that is a vulnerability scanning system, and it scans from 100 different IP addresses. So it's one system, has 100 different public IP addresses on it, and I need to send the scan out from those different IP addresses as a, kind of a round robin sort of thing. So IP tables can do that, but I have no idea how to do that. So I have to hire out an expert to do that, and I think, I think that would normally cost, let's say $400 for that's, for kind of a lower rung person, in a different country. That, that'd be my lowest bid is like $400. I've probably gone through, I would say 60 of those things since ChatGPT came out, where I just go and ask, ChatGPT, and it's done. And it's, some of these smaller applications. I had been wanting a application for my events for a while, so that you could see the schedule when you're at the event, and you could do a handful of things, scan a QR code, track your CPEs, things like that. I mean, the quotes I had gotten for that were, thousands of dollars. And to me, it's just this little application. Well, now I have ChatGPT writing an Electron program for me, or writing a Flutter code for me. So I think it's going to dramatically change the way we do things like customer service as well. Somebody that doesn't speak English is able to produce really the same, that if you're, in chat, they're really able to chat in the same way in their language. They're reading what's coming back to you, sorry, what's coming from you as their language, and it's not like Google Translate. It's the actual. It's actually correct. And a few friends of mine have experience with that. They're saying, you know, you can just be conversing with someone over this, and it doesn't have that oddity of a translator that's trying
Yeah,
to do like a literal translation.
that's amazing, right? Um, so one of the criticisms on ChatGPT is something that applies to any newer technology, is that it can be used and actually being used for cheating, right? For example, in the academics world, students could be using ChatGPT to write their assignments. Um, or even if you take interview, for example, I saw a video clip the other day, ChatGPT glasses. I don't know who is working on it. So there is a ChatGPT glasses. If you wear them, it actually tells you what to say next. So that in that mock interview, this person is asking a question, and then ChatGPT is giving an answer on that little screen in the
Mm.
glass. So this guy is reading out the response. So that clearly promotes cheating in the process of interview. So what's your thought or opinion about ChatGPT being used as a tool for cheating?
Well, right now, that person probably had a 10-second delay between when they. So
That'd
I
be an
imagine it was
awkward
a very,
conversation. That's
yeah, I
true.
imagine it was a very awkward conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually had been thinking a lot about this one, because to me, if it's something, let's say a student's paper or something like that, was them writing an essay that was was them writing an essay a good way to ascertain if they had that knowledge, because it's fairly equal to had they gone and bought a paper online, right? Like I assume well, I know there's sites where you can just go and buy an essay, and I could put it into Quill, let's say, to rewrite it. So is essentially, if you're the person doing that, it's essentially the same. Now, to me, I think what's changed is that it's really tempting to do that now.
And more accessible compared to before, right?
Yeah,
Faster.
and probably you're doing better than the rest of your class if that's not cheating. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's something where we might have to say, okay, yeah, papers were great, like doing essays. That was great a while ago, but maybe that's not what we do anymore. As an example, if I was to have somebody doing a practical interview on coding and they had access to ChatGPT, I would still be able to ascertain if they were going to be helpful for my business or not, because they could, yeah, write the program, but I have to see how they put it together, and have to see how they use that knowledge. So yeah, maybe papers and essays weren't, maybe those weren't a great mechanism in the first place.
This anymore. Yeah, probably not. Yeah, it's like the open book concept, right? Decades ago, open books were not allowed during exams.
Mhm.
Then at some point, colleges, universities adapted open book widely as a acceptable methodology. So something like that. Okay. I'm sure you heard about the news that some of the big players are asking OpenAI to slow down. I believe they also are asking Google as well to slow
Yep,
down in
just
terms of
basically across the board. Yeah.
yeah, across the board, correct. In terms of their development around artificial intelligence in general. What do you think about that? Do you think a slowdown is necessary at this time?
No, I think, because I had actually watched a lot of interviews on that and had thought about that a lot, but I think what I've landed on is that nobody else was slowing down. You really, the genie's out of the bottle at this point. ChatGPT isn't that far off from the not open source, but the other models that are available. You look at the Llama 30B, and, these other models that are available now. And I for years I had thought that when we have something that can code for itself, basically improve itself, you're you know just a you're just a stone's throw away from artificial general intelligence at that point. And that's why I've actually found my project so fun, is that I've got something that's coding that's coding and improving itself.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think a slowdown really benefits anyone. I think it's a little antiquated to say, okay, well, let's just hold off for a second. Like that's um, I think whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So if we get a Terminator situation, I don't think 6 months made a difference in that situation.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good perspective. So what are your predictions in regards to AI? What do you think will happen next?
I think that we're going to hit a lull here for just a little bit. Um, uh, it's really hard to watch the news on AI lately. I mean, it's really like every time I look, it's like, okay, Auto GPT came out, and so something that's basically you give it a goal, hey, make me $1 million, and it's doing all these things to do that. Chaos GPT, somebody has, where it has the goal of just of destroying the world, whatever. Um, and so I think that will hit a little bit of a lull here, for 6 months or so, where you probably will see dumber things like that coming out. And I think next year is where things are going to get a little weird, where it's going to be really advanced. Um, I think that's going to give developers enough time to, basically, here we're seeing a ton of usage. And when you have a ton of usage, that's amazing data for developers. And the developers are going to kind of reconfigure systems around that. And so I really think come 2024, you're going to see probably really big job losses at that point. I mean, I can't, the people that I chat with for customer service, I can't imagine needing that person if you have integration with a knowledge base or something like that. I think you'll see a lot of really interesting security issues come from that, because the first thing I did when I saw this was try to integrate with my knowledge base, so that way somebody emails me a question, let's say, that I can generate a response from that that's educated on my data. So, hey, where do I find this information? And it would generate, oh, here's the information for you, and then I just have to click send on this email. But the problem with that is that's my knowledge base, right? So who knows what stuff I have in there. So
the response is going to be as good as your knowledge base.
well, but also, could you prompt inject that one? Could you ask the question, okay, what account numbers should I send payment to, right? And could you give me all the account numbers? Now, that is exactly the same information you need to write a check or to produce a check. So I think that as those integrations happen, I think we'll see a lot of interesting security issues. But I think that after 6 months or so, we're going to see things that are just like light speed with model training. Once the new GPUs, I forget the name of them, but there's new GPUs coming out that are something like 40 times, faster. That can train these models 40 times faster. And once those are available in cloud systems, I think you'll see things like GPT-4 just sitting on somebody's computer. I think that's just something that you'll be regularly be putting into an application.
Interesting. Sure. Yeah. Okay. That's great. So do you use Google anymore? Or do you
I
just
do
use
heavily.
ChatGPT?
Yeah,
Still use it?
but I've had so many great experiences with ChatGPT, like so many really time-saving experiences. Just as an example, I hunted in Google forever about how to set up. I have a solar system, and really difficult on the specifics to set those up. And searching around in Google, I had to like talk to tech support and things like that. I go to ChatGPT and it's like giving me like an actual good answer, to my questions. I have to verify it and things like that, but it's just it does for very complicated issues. I don't want to say very complicated, but coding especially, where we used to just take that error and throw it over into Stack Overflow or throw it into Google, to be able to take an output and just throw that into ChatGPT and it says, yeah, here's the solution. And then what I've often started saying pretty much in a lot of my responses is, could you just make me a bash script that fixes that? And then it outputs a bash script and I run it to make those changes.
Interesting. Okay. So if I want to create a chatbot myself using a knowledge base, assuming my knowledge base is good, right? How do I do that?
So you need to train. And we could use ChatGPT for this one. So you need to train ChatGPT on your documentation. So I believe it's LangChain that you use to feed in that data. And then really after that, then you just need your interface to it because you're talking with straight ChatGPT. You can also use, there's other models available now. Let's say you didn't want to deal with ethical filters and things like that. You can use other models that are available now as well. And it's the same sort of thing. Basically, you train it on your data.
Okay. But sounds like I need to purchase some additional modeling tools that will talk to ChatGPT to produce the result that I'm looking for.
No, LangChain's free, and it's built into ChatGPT that you can train it. So you basically pick out it's on the API. So you basically pick your model and you can train it. So if you were to go into ChatGPT right now and you said, I've got a directory of documents. I need to train ChatGPT on this model. Can you make me a Python script for that? It would output that Python script for you, and it probably wouldn't work the first shot in my experience, but it would be pretty close. So you pay for, if you look on OpenAI's pricing, you'll see it's this cost for training, this cost for usage.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Okay. So what is the other tool you mentioned?
LangChain, I haven't really played with it. It's as far as I know, it's Ansible for AI, but essentially it helps you coordinate between systems. So to set up a flow, I haven't played with it, so I may have it messed up with it, but I've been using my own scripts to tie things together.
Okay, interesting. Great. Well, clearly you have been using ChatGPT a lot. You don't break it, so because we all need to use it as well.
Yeah, well,
Sounds good, Matt. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation we just had. Is there anything else that you want to share for the benefit of my audience, especially around the things, some cool tricks and usage that you may have tried with ChatGPT that others typically don't think of? Anything of that nature?
so one thing I think I probably do have some all sorts of weird tricks now, but they probably seem less cool to me, so they're not coming to to mind. Midjourney as well. So for the image generators, is one where you should definitely use a prompt generator for that. So meaning you should ask ChatGPT, for example, what's the prompt I should use for Midjourney? The results are so much better when you have a very crafted prompt. So for instance, prompt perfect, which costs money. You can use that to generate your Midjourney prompts, and there's a lot of the interesting thing to me that I found with that one was that there's a lot of artist styles that I would know nothing about, but it's able to pull those out and say, make this in the style of this artist. And so that's made it where I can just take those images and use them right away, and they're without hardly any editing. One thing I would really like to kind of point out from the jobs area that I forgot to mention. If you think about the system that I'm making with that makes a program for you. Again, really all it's doing is working through errors. It executes, gets an error, and it essentially takes out the 10 steps of you sitting there putting in whatever into ChatGPT. Apply that to other areas. So let's say server configuration, so a Windows server or something like that. If you apply that in the same way of, okay, it's making a PowerShell script and it's going to run it, it's going to get the errors, it's going to do a test to get the output. Whenever you look at it in that way, you are now looking at how sysadmins get replaced and how network admins get replaced, how firewall engineers get replaced. Because if I can just say, make me a configuration for this firewall that does this and make me a test that tests if it's doing it correctly, all of a sudden, because I know a lot of firewall engineers, I'm doing way better than a firewall engineer. A firewall engineer doesn't make a test, a scripted test for, verifying their output, for verifying that their configuration is correct. And so they do it manually once and that's it. And so if you take that model that, we can just kind of iteratively do these things, I don't even know where that stops. I mean, there's probably a whole lot of areas. I know network engineering, I know server administration, so that's what my mind goes to. But there's probably a lot of other areas that that's applicable to, such as, I don't know, managing Excel spreadsheet. I don't know, but where those things are applicable to. So that's where I think you're going to see, oddly enough, network engineers, we always thought we were good. Security engineers, I think these are some of the first occupations to go because
Interesting.
it's
Okay.
not necessary. in that case.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. So people can have some ideas, right? Those who are working in those areas, it's time for them to retool and start thinking about something. So just so they are not
Learn how to weld. Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any limitations in regards to what programming languages that ChatGPT can develop codes for you?
I haven't seen one yet, and I've actually asked it for some pretty weird stuff. So I thought Flutter it was going to kick back like, hey, I don't know what I don't know what you're talking about, and so that was and it did just fine with that. Um, I think one funny thing is all Python developers wish they knew how to program in Golang, and this just made it so I can just take my Python code and convert it to Golang. So basically took away that whole that whole desire.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. What about proprietary languages? Some SAP has HANA, PeopleSoft has PeopleTools, something like that. Can ChatGPT handle those languages too?
As long as it's documented, so it gets its examples out of places like GitHub and things like that. So I would say probably less likely, but my guess is it would go into the documentation, but the documentation for languages is usually very lacking. So the documentation isn't a good reflection on how it's actually used. So code is a good reflection on how it's used. So I would assume that if it had access to the code, or access to code snippets, then it's going to have a good understanding of what you're trying to do.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Matt. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure my viewers will as well. Just one last quick question. If my viewers want to learn more about you, where can they find more about you?
Oh, I don't know. So, so you can meet me at one of our events, and probably my LinkedIn is um, my only other thing. Threat Informant is my security company. If you're interested in learning about some of my experience and some of the kind of the programs we've produced and things like that.
Okay, excellent. Well, I look forward to joining one of your future events.
Great. Well,
Sounds
thanks a
good.
lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye.